We couldn't get a great view of that snow swath yesterday morning. On Monday, just with all the cloud cover on the backside of the system naturally as that kind of Arctic air plunged down. But near the end of the day, yesterday on Monday, that's the satellite loop I'm playing for you here, those clouds started to clear out. I'll kind of pause it there. System exiting off to the east. You can see that they're over the Atlantic, the winter storm from this weekend, showing this impressive snow swath, just very anomalous, all the way from like the U.S. southern border, West Texas, eastern New Mexico, all the way up through the Mid-South, the Ohio River Valley, obviously seeing some of the heaviest snowfall in a swath right about here, and up through the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, where a tremendous amount of snow fell as well. On top of that, we have lake effect snow falling yesterday overnight, and then here this morning as well. We'll look at that in a second. But also, if you just kind of eyeball this map, you can see this is that the rain-snow line on the southern edge of initially the Appalachians down through the southeastern U.S., but a lot of rain falling in here. Still some cold temperatures here this morning. We'll look at those in this area. And over to the west, you'll notice, like, if you just peek in here, I know, let's see if I can play this so we can see some of the cloud cover here. Play that. You're not seeing a lot of snow here. So at least so far this winter, while we've had shots of snow earlier in the water year into California, we're not seeing as much snow over in the western U.S. It's kind of becoming an ongoing problem and story, more so across the Midwest. In the case of this picture here, across the mid-south and the southern plains as well. It's been interesting to watch this kind of switch up in the wintertime pattern here set up as we've gone kind of in more of heart of winter, if you will. Now, the impacts of that winter storm are still being felt. It's just an impressive, impactful storm. We still have a tremendous amount of power outages this morning. You're talking hundreds of thousands of people remain without power, and you have to consider the fact that we've had very cold temperatures. I'm just peeking around here. This is poweroutage.com. And Tennessee, 172,000. Mississippi, still 140,000 people without power here. Significant impacts from largely the ice storm in these locations here. And when you couple that with the morning temperatures here this morning, the freezing line on this map here about 6 a.m. Central Time, all the way down here along the Gulf Coast. Very cold temperatures north of that, across the Mid-South, some of those areas, 8 degrees here this morning in Nashville, Tennessee. So extremely cold air on the backside of the system. That's obviously having an impact on natural gas prices. We talked about that at the end of last week, and they've only continued to rally thereafter. Impressive run-up. You're talking at least a high over the last year. If we compare this to the last 5 years, you're now reaching marks that we haven't seen since the rally of 22 and 23. We jump over and look at the radar here this morning. Just see some lake effect showers moving through kind of the upper Midwest, portions of the Northeast here. This has been a common sight this year. Not a lot of rain, snow, and returns here. Not a lot of precipitation here. Obviously, we had the winter storm this past weekend, but the southern U.S., the southern Mississippi Valley was running over particularly dry at the end of last year and to start this year. And all the snow has kind of been up in here initially, and then at times over here in Montana, kind of missing in between. Precipitation missing down here and not much over here. So sort of returning back to what we've been used to here. But again, obviously this area, tremendous amount of precipitation falling. And even if we jump over and look, I knew they do the traffic trick on Google Maps, but there's a number of areas in here that are still seeing slowed down traffic some 48 or 72 hours after the snow has left. I mean, I can probably find areas and draw a swath across that. We saw some of that heaviest snow where you can still see traffic delayed. I'm sure a lot of this has to do perhaps with trees down, effects from that ice storm, but slowed traffic continues in these areas, and obviously very cold on some of the stretches of road here. And then you can see the slowed traffic here from the lake effect snow that's falling pretty heavily in western Michigan, as used to it as they are. Kind of a bigger picture, zooming out, thinking about the forecast here over the next kind of 7 to 10 days. We've been talking about this MJO transition, finally moving through phases 6, 7, 8, 1, maybe even into 2, 3. It's a possibility Eric walked through in the kind of February forecast yesterday. And I think we're starting to see the effects of that on the jet stream. We see this nice Pacific jet stream extension. I can draw a line in that jet stream all the way from Japan, north of Hawaii. It's breaking down into a ridge over the western U.S., and this pattern is going to amplify here as we go through the next kind of 7 days to 10 days. We have this momentum coming out of the Pacific. It's breaking down into a ridge across the western U.S., and we're seeing this kind of generally northwest or northerly flow over the eastern U.S. This is going to amplify so much. We'll talk about this kind of in a second, that we're actually going to get kind of a split southern component to it, almost like a subtropical jet, and that's going to have some impacts, I think, to the precipitation forecast for the southern kind of tier in the southern plains of the U.S. We do jump over and look at that phase diagram. This is just from the ECMWF forecast. There's that transition that we underwent here. As we've gone through January, through phase 6, into phase 7, the forecast now taking us out 1, 2, potentially either into 3, or kind of back over potentially to the maritime continent. So this decent transition through the Pacific across the Western Hemisphere. And as a result, I think we're seeing that Pacific jet stream extension and the impacts to our forecast as a result of that. Now, usually when you get these big Pacific jet extensions, I start thinking about these transitions through phases 7, 8, 1, west precipitation, chances increasing. And if we kind of scrutinize the forecast here, unfortunately, I'm struggling to find a lot of chances for that. Now, we'll talk about where that's going in just a second here, but unfortunately, mid to late January, you talk about big Pacific jet extension like this, I start getting excited that maybe we're going to improve some of that west snowfall, but perhaps just the impacts of the fact that we're in a La Nina background state, the tendency for the jet stream to undergo these large splits, amplifications, and deviations before it reaches the western seaboard tends to increase, and just not seeing a reliable precipitation maker out of this MJO transition. I want to jump over and look at those temperatures here this morning, because as that ridge amplifies in the west and lead up to that Pacific jet extension, you're going to see temperatures continue to warm this week in the western U.S., but they stay cool in the central and eastern U.S. So I'm just taking this through quickly. I'll restart that. This is here Tuesday morning, and we looked at a lot of these lows just now on those current temperatures. We take it into tomorrow. It continues on the backside of it, especially under that deeper snowpack across the Ohio River Valley. We talked about some of the heaviest snow falling there, and that continues on Thursday. Temperatures amplifying, warming in the western U.S., and you can just kind of presume the flow is going to be coming down like this out of the jet stream, given that kind of west-east split across the continental U.S. If I take this into Friday, temperatures maybe even bottoming out further across the eastern Corn Belt, the mid-Atlantic. Saturday, much cooler now across that same kind of stretch of area where we talked about that snow swath having that direct impact on the temperatures here. No, not a lot of opportunities to melt that snow, obviously. Still warm in the west this weekend. And then Sunday, that cold air entering all the way down, again, back to the Gulf Coast. And we're not talking 28 degrees along the Gulf Coast like here this morning. This is temperatures down 21, southern Louisiana 24, in New Orleans. If some of these forecasts hold, 18, 21 Pensacola, you're getting down to like 30, 33 near Orlando, 36 in Miami. This would be an impressive southeastern deep freeze. So we'll have to watch out on the possibility of this. And again, I think the rally that we've seen through the gas prices has been, as a result of this kind of next cold surge combined with the last one, just having a kind of double whammy impact on the impact of the grid and the stress there. But you can also see, if you look toward the northern plains, that warm up coming out of the Pacific, getting all the way over now, to portions of the northern plains, if not the upper Midwest. So as we go through this forecast time period, you're going to see that continue to amplify even further as this kind of split becomes apparent between the west, east. I'll play this forward, and the ECMWF forecast here, we have been watching, as Eric mentioned, the possibility for that eastern U.S. potential like nor'easter type setup at the end of this week with that flow diving out like this. Sometimes we see it curl up nicely for a big system to come through that kind of corridor there, either through the mid-Atlantic, the southeast, or the northeast. I'm going to play this forecast forward. We see some precipitation here in the middle of the week, impacting like the Seattle-Tacoma area, far northwest Oregon. Still seeing some light snow showers move through the Great Lakes corridor, and we're starting to see some sort of precipitation return, some low trying to form here by about Saturday at noon. We now have that coastal low forming off the coast of North Carolina. Plenty of cold air. We saw that in the forecast to help generate snow on the backside of this over North Carolina, perhaps portions of South Carolina. This could be a heavy snowfall event for a pretty localized area here, getting into like Norfolk, eastern Virginia here along the coast. This is Saturday evening as that low spins up. Forecasts have been kind of mixed back and forth with how deep this low gets, but you get down below 990, 980 millibars here, you're going to have some significant impacts to the coastline, down to like 978, maybe 972, kind of hard to see that. And heavy snow event, you're talking a 24-hour snow event for North Carolina here. Now, this is 132 hours out in the forecast. It's just one forecast run, so it's not like we can call this for certain for North Carolina here. And then just so happens the ECMWF keeps this off the coast, deep 970 and below low, maybe like 964. Perhaps some snow showers moving through the middle part of the country, the Mississippi Valley, as we go through the weekend. We've seen this kind of short wave coming through behind the system, but this has not been a very potent system in a lot of these models here. Now, the western U.S., I mentioned the possibility for that precip. We are seeing some here along the Pacific Northwest coast, even getting into the Willamette Valley here, but not nearly as much. Maybe getting into the basins, but not nearly as much as kind of I would hope for with that Pacific jet extension. If I play this forecast out through Monday, we're getting pretty far out in the forecast here, but you can see that shortwave system moving through the Midwest, perhaps a quick shot of snow there, maybe a dusting or an inch through middle parts of the country, and then potentially next week, another low wrapping up in the southern part of the country. That split that I talked about, we'll talk about that in a second, but this is getting more amplified out of the west. We're actually seeing the southern component kind of draw up from the south. That's increasing precipitation chances kind of in this area here. And that could consolidate a system later into next week that ends up pushing across the middle part of the country. All right, I do want to jump over. Let's look at the GFS and just see how it compares to the ECMWF really quickly. Kind of watch the evolution of that low here this weekend. As we get to Friday, we started to see the precipitation returns pick up along that front there across the Gulf. Snow showers picking up over South Carolina, western North Carolina. This wouldn't be very strong yet, but now we're talking Saturday at lunch. We see that coastal low trying to form there. Sure enough, it amplifies overnight, now midnight into Sunday morning, and that heavier snow maybe even further east across far southeastern Virginia, the barrier islands like Cape Hatteras under the influence of this low. But, just eyeballing this, pretty similar to the ECMWF that we just reviewed on the slide before. Play this forecast forward, the GFS hugs us a little bit closer, still almost kind of the same depth there, maybe 964, 962, hugs it a little bit closer to the northeast, such that now you're getting at least some snowfall along the New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Cape Cod. This would be heavier snowfall for like Boston, especially up into Canada as well, as the system kind of spins and moves toward the northeast. So GFS pretty similar, kind of showing that snow threat, wind threat to eastern North Carolina, Virginia, slides up and kind of strikes just the far eastern kind of coastlines of New England with some heavy snowfall. And then just let's get more opinions on this. Jump over and look at the ECMWF AIFS. Again, early in the week, showers moving through the northwest. By Thursday, now Friday, this low consolidating. Obviously, this model not as good of a resolution, but I'm really looking at the location of that low, right? Closer to the coast, the impacts are going to be more so over the mid-Atlantic and North Carolina. And sure enough, AIFS, maybe more snow over North Carolina and Virginia. This model's been performing a little bit better too at this range, so I'm inclined to kind of lean on it here. And then more impacts to the northeast, so and then heading up into Canada there. So this is the kind of area we're keeping an eye on, kind of the extreme kind of eastern edge for that heavier snowfall potential. We almost have like the coast jutting out. Those are the areas right now. Now, I have to say, we're 120 hours out, kind of tracking that up here. A good like rule of thumb when you're tracking the position of these lows, because obviously last week we saw that low position jump around. That impacted the forecast significantly for folks kind of in this corridor along that rain and snow line. Who got just rain? Who got the freezing rain? Who got the heaviest snowfall? It matters significantly to get this low track correct. At 120 hours out here, these can deviate still quite a bit. I'd almost just eyeballing it like that's not a bad estimate of how much we could still see deviations 120 hours out. So such that this thing's bending all the way back, and by tomorrow or the next day, we're seeing forecasts adjust and place this low, over Roanoke and Blacksburg, or right over the middle of North Carolina. That would push the impacts further inland, heavier snowfall across the mid-Atlantic, maybe like DC, New York, Boston, across a wider area here. At the same time, we could see a shift out toward Bermuda to the point where you're getting zero snow across the eastern seaboard. There's still kind of a wide range of shifts that are left at 120 hours. Now, you start getting below that into like 80 hours and 60 hours, that sort of envelope's getting smaller, more typically, maybe something like that. And then when you're in the lead up, like a day or two before the event, especially with these deep synoptic lows, your shifts aren't going to be quite as extreme. You're maybe going to shift it a few counties over, but not nearly as much as you can, still 4 or 5 days out, like right here. I want to jump over and show that jet stream forecast for the North Pacific here. I picked on the GFS here, and I'm looking at that Pacific jet extension. We talked about this to start. We looked at it on Earth at Null School, kind of extending all the way north of Hawaii here, breaking down into that ridge over the western U.S. We saw the temperatures warm up here this week as a result of that. As I play this forecast out, even like into early February, you're seeing this split here and this impressive amplification. So the flow is splitting, one piece of it going across Canada, another piece actually coming down through the eastern Pacific and helping to bring up flow, like a subtropical jet component, here to the southern U.S. as we get into early February. So you're talking now that like 7 to 10 day, that 8 to 14 day precipitation, map or outlook is going to have what we would think, a better flow here, chances for rain across the southern U.S. and the southeast, perhaps, with enough cold air here as there's likely to be, even snow on the north side of that, not dissimilar from where we saw that rain snow line here with this recent system. So keep an eye on that possibility as we get further out into that first week of February. If we look at the long range forecast from our kind of 3 to 4 panel here, 8 to 14 days out, we do see ECMWF AIFS, GFS ensemble, and a little bit here from the ECMWF ensemble of that increased precipitation chances, particularly for the southern plains, and maybe, depending on how that low kind of wraps up, pushing off to the east. Some of these models not really showcasing a ton of precipitation here. That is a possibility with that low wrapping up out of the south like we've been seeing. Unfortunately, with that split flow, however, you look across the western U.S., outside of what we saw coming through this week, the next 48 hours, and then maybe a little bit later in the week, as that low wraps up in the east, we saw some precipitation increasing here. But beyond that, just not a favorable forecast right now for California, Sierra Nevada precipitation, or really a lot of these other western basins and areas that we're watching for snowpack. See that in the 8 to 14 day outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center, well below average expected in precipitation there. And that's consistent with the other long-range models here. I want to bring this down. We'll look at temperatures really quickly. Not a huge change looking out in the future. Obviously, I mentioned as we go through this week into next, we're seeing that west to east split, but the warmth is starting to get into the northern plains, all the way up through the Canadian prairie. And as we go further out into the forecast, that stays consistent. Not a huge change, maybe a little bit of that warmth in that 8 to 14 day period getting out into the central part of the country, finally giving us some sort of break, at least for folks kind of west of the Mississippi River, but a lot of that cold staying locked in across the southeast and the eastern U.S. over the next 10 to 15 days. I want to jump over quickly here before I finish up, looking at the Hobmuller diagrams over the central Pacific, really kind of all the way across the equator, but the area I'm focused on is right here. Again, with these charts, we're looking at westerly wind anomalies here out of the Pacific. This is something we talked about earlier this month. And then we have some easterly wind anomalies in blue here across the central Pacific. And I mentioned this even last week, that when we get these easterlies, trade wind surges here across the central Pacific, that's almost more indicative of La Nina. And what we're seeing right now at the nose of this westerly wind burst, kind of near Tahiti, right over the central Pacific, we're seeing convergence. This wind is out of the east, at least the anomaly, that's out of the west. Convergence over the central Pacific, convection, thunderstorms in this area here. Great recipe for some of these Pacific jet extensions to get all the way over and start impacting our weather, kind of similar to what we talked about earlier, right? But after that, those kind of trade winds settle in over this region here, and that's probably going to help keep La Nina around a little bit longer. If we look at the ENSO index here, it's been rising. We've seen kind of this weakness in La Nina. It's been starting to fade away. We talked about how the pattern was starting to look a little bit El Nino-y now as we headed into the new year, but I would expect as a result of those trade winds for that to level off, if not La Nina to gain back a little bit of ground as we go into early February, something to keep an eye on. Now, it's also linked up to that MJO activity, so we can find my place, as that extends back off over here. It's not uncommon to see those easterlies here, so this isn't out of place by any means here for late January, early February. But it's just something I kind of want to keep an eye on as we go through February and March, because it does mean, we're not surging quite as quickly into El Nino. Also saying, if you look in the long range here, this takes us all the way out to February 11th. It's the ECMWF ensemble. I just kind of want to get a different opinion here, so I'm going to ask the AIFS ensemble. And yeah, sure enough, those easterlies at the nose of those, and this westerly wind here, we have convection kind of returning to the maritime continent here. That would be like getting out into February. We think about kind of those phases as we get into February. We start to think like phases 4 or 5 as being a little bit warmer, especially for the central and eastern U.S. So kind of curious to watch if we get some warmth back in to some of the areas we talked about being so locked in with the cold as we go a little bit further into February. The dynamical models from the ECMWF ensemble, are kind of mixed on this bag. I'm kind of hesitant to show them just out at that range, but at least some kind of synoptic support potentially maybe for a warm up coming in maybe the middle, late period of February for an area that's very cold right now. Obviously, natural gas prices responding to that, and but don't see it as significantly here. If anything, the ECMW extended model flips this back cold pretty aggressively as you get into the middle, late part of February here. Now, there might be some support for that, right? When we look at the polar vortex, it's kind of split influences here. I think going into February, adding a little bit more uncertainty than we typically see, but just something I want to keep an eye on as we press further through March into February. Precipitation-wise, again, looking out through February here, we get into like phases 4 and 5. We kind of don't think of those as super or particularly wet as you go into the southeast. And I'm kind of looking around at some of these phases, try to find like a little bit more in February support for that western precipitation. And maybe phase 2, phase 3, right? You get these transitions, phase 1, 2, and 3. There's that kind of predictable Pacific jet extension all the way over toward California. You start getting up to like phase 4, phase 5. A trough wouldn't hurt, especially for like intermountain snow, but maybe not as much for California. So just kind of something I'm keeping an eye on as we go further out. I'll leave it there today. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow on Wednesday, and I'll see you all Thursday. Thanks for watching.